Scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, I got to tell you, as we're finishing 3 weeks in Matthew 25, and so the lectionary schedule has these 3 stories that have come in a row out of the 25th chapter of Matthew, I think the passages kind of get summed up by one of my least favorite words in the English language. All right, it's a word that I think if you use it too often will cost you friends. It can certainly make people not want to listen to you anymore. And this word is should, especially when prefaced by the word you. All right, I got to tell you, I really can't stand it. You should. I mean, that is the way. If you say, it's like one of those Alexa commands. If you start a sentence to me with "you should," my ears shut off. My brain just goes into hibernation, and I just wait until your lips stop moving before I start listening again. All right, it's just one of my least favorite words. It confers obligation, and when someone uses it on you, you feel like, oh man, everything's my fault, because I should have done it, and I failed to do it, and I'm just a terrible, awful, lousy person. And somehow that can be what you take away from these stories in Matthew 25, because there's so much should in it. The bridesmaids should have brought extra oil. No one told them to, but you should have just brought extra oil. That servant with the 1 talent should have turned it into more talents. The master didn't say what you're supposed to do with the money, but you should have done it anyway. The obligation had been placed on them. They didn't know that they had the obligation, and they yet suffered the consequences for not coming through. It doesn't seem fair. And you know what? The story today doesn't seem fair from the perspective of the goats. See, the goats are told, you're goats, and they go, "Hey, are you kidding? When was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked? When did we do this? We didn't see you. I mean, Jesus, come on. If we saw you, we would have served you. Are you kidding, Jesus? If you were hungry, I would have given you the best food. You could have had my food. But we don't recall seeing you. We don't recall you asking. Of course we would have helped. How can you blame us for not helping you. But the problem is that they should have cared. They should have cared about anyone who was hurting. See, the issue is not a matter of who it was. The issue is the situation the person was in. That when you encountered someone who was hurting, when you encountered someone who was hungry, when you encountered someone who was sick, when you encountered someone who was in prison, no matter what the situation was, you should have cared about it. And you know, the implication here is that they didn't care because those other people were nobodies. See, because they go, when did we see you, Jesus? We would have helped you. Sure, of course we didn't help these other people. But we would have helped you because you're a somebody. We walked past the nobodies. And we have this a lot in our world, don't we? You know, the somebody versus the nobody. And it comes up in situations that make me crazy. Like in churches, you often hear a lot of people go, well, you need to take care of your members before you take care of the non-members. Really? Thought everybody's a somebody. Worst one ever that really shocked me. I didn't realize that this happened because I hadn't spent much time in that environment. But back when I was in seminary and I had my student chaplaincy time at a hospital, I didn't know they did this. Maybe some of you don't know that they do this. Every day, I got a report in the chaplain's office of VIP patients. Yeah. And I was told, Mr. Student Chaplain, you have to make sure that you stop by their rooms. You're available to anybody who needs you, but you have to stop by those rooms. Could be anybody. Family member of a board member of the hospital, you stop by their room. Also, of course, staff members, you stop by their room. Right? Had a list of VIP patients, and that's what they were referred to as. They didn't come up with some euphemism around it. They just said, here are the VIPs who are in the hospital. You need to go see them. I got to tell you, as a seminary student chaplain, it was really kind of rubbing me the wrong way. It's like, wait a second, aren't these all hurting, sick people? And I'll pray with anyone? And they're like, yeah, of course you'll pray with anyone, but them first. Them first. So much of our lives are constructed in that way. There's this thing in ethics that they talk about, and it's called, it's got a name, and when I show you the diagram, you're going to recognize immediately that this is what so many of us do, and it's called a moral circle. The idea is that we have our lives arranged in a series of concentric circles with ourselves at the middle, and we care less as you move out from the middle. Ourselves in the middle, family right tight, then our communities, then our country, and then out there is all of humanity. Why were those people ignored by the goats? Because they just weren't close enough to the middle of the circle. Jesus would have been in the middle of the circle. Everyone's saying, oh yeah, Jesus, if you were here right in front of me, you are right there. You are right next to me in the middle of that circle. These other folks, they're kind of out there. And let's face it, for a lot of people, a lot of society might as well be Pluto orbiting out there. So far out, they don't even notice. And what's Jesus trying to say? Where am I on this diagram? I am everywhere on this diagram. I am everywhere. I'm not just in the inner circle or just in the inner couple of circles. Jesus is trying to make the point, I'm everywhere. I'm everywhere on this whole picture. No matter where you are, I'm there. So he says, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you didn't do it to me. And we understand this rationally. We understand this intellectually. Of course, we've got an obligation to everyone as a human being. We know we have an obligation to treat everyone as if they're Jesus. We know we have an obligation to see everyone and see them as a child of God. We understand that. That's not news, I hope. If you've never heard that before, something has gone wrong in your moral development. You all know this to be true. And because we all know this to be true, and we've all heard this before, and this has been told to us from the time we were little kids, we hear this story, and we kind of get convicted by it. We get convicted by it because as we look at our own lives, we understand, absolutely, we have all succeeded and we have all failed. We understand that we all have sheep days and we all have goat days. I mean, after all, is there anyone in here who has never helped a stranger in need? Of course not. I imagine every single person in here has a time when you have encountered someone that you felt like you had basically no obligation to, other than they were a fellow human being, and you helped them. And I'm guessing that every single person in this room has a time when there was someone you encountered who was in need, and you walked right past. We've all had sheep days, and we have all had goat days. And you hear this story, and my question is, okay, which one am I being judged by? My best day or my worst day? Is it that I ever walked past someone in need? Or is it that I ever helped someone even at, some cost to myself in terms of money or time or whatever? But I think there's a slightly more subtle standard in here. And it's actually my favorite of the examples that Jesus gives. Because of all those examples, there's one that is a little bit different from the others. And it's this one. I was in prison, and you visited me. Why is it different? Because where are they after the visit? They're still in prison. Right? Hungry person, you fed them. They're not hungry anymore. The naked person, you clothed them. They're not naked anymore. The prisoner, still in prison. You didn't say, I was in prison and you busted me out. I was in prison and you brought a file in the cake. No. See, sometimes we hear this and we think that the emphasis is only on solving problems for people. And when that becomes the judgment of whether you solved the problems, you're not going to be able to solve everyone's problems. You just can't. There are more hungry people than any of us can feed. Right? That's the reality. Right? There are more people who need warm clothes this winter than we could possibly provide. We can try, but we can't solve everyone's problem. And I don't even want to talk about medical bills. All right. We'd collectively go bankrupt trying to solve everyone's medical bills. So if the standard is going to be strictly solving the problems, we're not going to be able to. But the thing that never goes away is the obligation to try to come alongside people in their hardships. Because this matters. It matters that you care. It matters, right? That's why it matters that even when you have a problem in life that you can't solve, that your friend can't solve, you still come alongside your friend to be with them in the struggle, and that matters. Right? You can't solve it, and maybe they don't even want you to solve it. But it matters that you cared. And that's one of the things that is so important, is that we never have people in the world about whom we stop caring. No matter how remote they are, no matter how intractable the problem is, no matter what the situation is, we can never allow ourselves to be people who stop caring. Because once we stop caring, then we've really said, you're outside my circle of even concern. We have a limited radius of being able to solve people's problems because we have limited resources with which to be able to do it. But we have an unlimited radius of people whose problems we can be concerned about, that we can care about, that we can pray for, that we can try and advocate for solutions for. Because if we stop caring, when we start saying that a particular group of people doesn't even deserve to be cared about, then our society is lost. Because we have to remember that we are all in it together, and life is ultimately a group activity. This is the last week of the church year. The church calendar is a little different than everyone else's calendar, and so the first Sunday of Advent next year is actually the start of a new church year, and most of the scripture passages will be from the Gospel of Mark instead of the Gospel of Matthew, as we've been in. So this is like the end of the church year, so sort of a summary of what the church year is about. So Happy New Year, everybody. And church is people doing life together. It's a community of people just trying to do life together, trying to figure it out together, trying to figure it out led by Jesus to lead us toward figuring it out the way Jesus wants us to figure out. But that's ultimately what it's about. We're just trying to do life together and support one another and pray for one another and have fellowship with one another. Do some good. Spread the gospel. Our family ministries, what is that about? It's about parents understanding that they can't do it alone. It's hard. Parenting, one of the hardest jobs there is. And they need a community. They need a community to do it effectively. Right? So they're going to help one another, support one another, and just try and be there with one another. Because it's all about mutuality. It's all about us trying to support one another. And Jesus makes this point because when he says in this passage, he says, look, you didn't do it. You did it to the least of these who are members of my family. Such a great phrase. Because a point that's often missed in here is that it's not just about your obligation to others, because the obligation is to members of his family. And who's his family? Children of God. That's his family. So who's his family? All of us are family. We are all members of God's family. We are all children of God. So it's not just about your obligation to them. It's a mutuality that exists, because when you are in need, Jesus wants others to care about you. So just as Jesus is with those who are in need, Jesus is with you in your need. When it's your turn to be sick, when it's your turn to be in prison, not necessarily a literal prison, but the all kinds of emotional prisons that we place ourselves in, Jesus is with you and wants others to see you and treat you as if you were him. Because you deserve to be treated as others deserve to be treated. It's a mutual obligation. It's not just a one-way should about how you treat others. It's also remembering that the should works both ways. That's why if you ever want to use the word should with me, don't preface it with you, but it's okay if you preface it with we. We should. Much better start to a sentence than you should. Because it works both ways. And it means that your obligation to help is not to the degree of martyrdom. Because at that point, all right, you're suffering. And that's a real problem. Because God doesn't want you to suffer either. You have an obligation to show compassion, to show help to others, but also to respect yourself in the process. You have an obligation to yourself to make sure that you are treated respectfully in the way that you deserve to be treated. You don't want to help and serve to the exclusion of yourself. And you know, when we see a lot of that in certain households, Thanksgiving, there were probably a fair number of homes where the person who spent all the time making all the food barely got to enjoy the day at all. And that's not right either. Right? The person who prepared it all, the person who did what they could to serve, the person who put all the effort in to make sure that everyone else was fed, they kind of deserved to have their time, to have their part, to have their share. And sometimes that gets forgotten. It's all about mutuality, because that's the way Jesus wants our lives to be. That's the way humanity is supposed to function, is when we care about others, not to the suffering of ourselves, but rather to the point where helping one another is a benefit to everyone, so that we're all treated like family. So, expand your moral circle. That's one of the things we're called to do. Or bring everyone else inside your circle. I don't know which direction the metaphor works better for you. Either make your circle bigger or bring more people inside it. There's plenty of room. Right? But also remember that you're in it. Because it's about our obligations to one another, to create a world where we respect everyone and everyone respects us, where we care about everyone and everyone cares about us, where we show compassion to everyone and we allow others to show compassion to us. It's when everyone is inside the circle that everyone benefits. And that's the world that Jesus wants us to live in. Amen.